today's World Insight with Tian Wei. Governance makes a difference in the Czech Republic. How? A former Czech Prime Minister counts the ways. And the trouble with global governance in dealing with climate change and digital regulation, in the words of a renowned professor on globalization.
The West itself is still not in a position to evaluate China's rise with any degree of objectivity.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, on CGTN. Governance makes a difference. We've been focusing our attention on that subject for some time, and today let's continue to meet some people in the know in that regard. Czech Republic, like many of its peers in the former Soviet bloc, has gone through dramatic changes since its so-called Velvet Revolution. Now the country's economy is taking off, but it is not without challenges. So what does it mean for governance? On that, I talked to the former Prime Minister of the country, Czech Republic. He said it's a mixture of lessons and experiences. Mr. Parubek, when we think about your country, people have witnessed the great change when it comes to economic power since the end of the Cold War. But at the same time, people are also asking as to where the country is heading for in terms of providing some kinds of reference about governance, some kinds of reference about the development trend of the economy, some kinds of reference about how Central and Eastern European countries and economies would function for the near future. What do you think?
At the beginning of 90s, very low transition exchange rate of Czech crown to convertible currencies in the world, to dollar, to German mark. We made also other mistakes in the last weeks. For example, Czech National Bank kept for 4 years practically from the beginning of this in November 1913 the artificial transition exchange rate of Czech currency, Czech crown to euro on the level €1 to 27 crowns. And it was a great mistake because real value of Czech currency at this moment is between 18 to 20 crowns per €1. And of course, if you have if you have so cheap currency, you must buying the modern technologies for more expensive prices. It was a great mistake. But I think that generally the development of Czech economy was not bad, but it could be better.
In 2018,
yes.
Mr. Prime Minister, you run your campaign as the president. Of course, you failed eventually. But why did you have the political courage and guts to want to come back again?
I'm not sure that I will come again, but because it is difficult, and I have a certain age, and but I have no healthy problems, and I am in good condition. But it is not only the thing that I wanted, but it must be a society need, one thing, and you must have certain support, not only of the people, but also of the people who have money, because for politics you need in so-called democracy money.
What do you make of that reality, the so-called necessities you just mentioned?
I think at this moment it is not necessary to hurry with my comeback to politics, and because we have a president, and after his mandate is finishing after 3 years, and we will see after 1-2 years. It is enough time for decision.
This year marks the 30 years anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was such a big event then. After 30 years, Mr. Prime Minister, what do you make of the time that your country has been experiencing since then? What is the biggest takeaway for you, do you think?
The change of the regime 30 years ago, it was a great opportunity for many people, and at this moment is a majority of Czech society satisfied with the development in last 30 years. Maybe 2/3 of the society are satisfied, and it is important figure. For me personally, it was a great change, and it was open space for my career, for my personal development, and it was important time.
Mr. Prime Minister, since we're here talking about governance, what do you consider as the biggest challenge for governance today?
I think for my country, of course, if the main challenge is to keep good economic development, and because if you have good development of the economy, of GDP, of the income of national budget, you can increase social programs, you can give more money to education, to the science and research and so on, and you can develop society. Without good functioning economy, it is impossible to do it.
What about for the world, do you think?
Maybe not same, but similar, because in the world it's necessary to keep certain reasonable development of the economy, and one way is to stop the trade wars between the states, because it is not good way for developing economy. It is obstacle.
Since you talk about the trade war, China-U.S. trade war now, some say it's trade, others say it's much beyond trade. There's likely to be a period of time in which both economies are going to compete against one another, more competition rather than cooperation. There's also the danger of so-called decoupling. There's pressure on the others whether to stand in one line or the others. At least some believe so. So, Mr. Prime Minister, what does that mean to you and your country?
Czech Republic is dependent, similar as Germany, on export, and 90% of our export is going to the states of European Union, and it is we need more diversify our export. And of course, if the countries which importing our goods will have certain problems, economic problems, and it is experience of former Czechoslovak Republic from the 30s, that it was also export economy, and when started crisis, it was a great obstacle for the Czechoslovak economy, and it destroyed not only economy but also political system in our country and in Central Europe, in Europe generally.
Now, Czech Republic is one of those economies enthusiastic about Belt and Road Initiative. What is there for Czech Republic?
Of course, just in Czech national interest is to cooperate with practically a whole spectrum of countries of the world, and also with China, because it is at this moment the second strongest economy in the world, and perspectively it is the strongest economy in the world. But frankly speaking, Chinese investments in the country are not so high at this moment.
Why not?
I think that there are certain specific reasons that the country was not open for a great Chinese investors. The investor who came from China as a main investor for the future, it was the company CFC was not a good choice, and I think that it was also not good choice the people who were from the Czech side cooperating with this company. But I think that the situation changed in last months, because as a substitute of this company, CFC, came a very experienced investor, Chinese investor, Citibank, and we will see in a few years if the changes will come or not. But I hope that the value of Chinese investments will increase.
You've been seeing, Mr. Prime Minister, China being regarded in the world from a wow factor to become a fear factor. And it's just within a few years' time. What do you make of this? I mean, how would you reconcile the two extremes?
I'm visiting China very often this year, and it is a really incredible impression for me, and I think that it could be very useful if many Czech politicians and Czech investors and entrepreneurs could opportunity to visit China and to see not only the economic results of Chinese economy, but also Chinese culture, because I think that it is necessary to understand this very interesting society and very strong society, stable society, and if you could understand this society, you can better cooperate.
You know, the way to operate, of course, implement the Belt and Road Initiative is not without challenges, because some of the countries are going through some transitions of their own, and therefore how to make sure it would happen and happen efficiently is a big question mark. And secondly, there are different views about the Belt and Road Initiative, whether China is only being selfish, quote unquote, to look at its own economy, export, oversupplies or not having others in mind during this process. What do you think, Mr. Prime Minister? Is this going to be a win-win?
Of course, nothing is going without difficulties, and everything needs certain time. I remember when I was here in China 2 years ago, and I saw in your TV the visit of Chinese president in Chile. 10 years ago, China and Chile contrasigned the agreement about strategic cooperation, and after 10 years was to see the results, a great increase, great jump of the exchange of goods, and practically trade balance without surpluses on both sides. And I think it is the way to be patient and to be concentrate for the things who are interesting. Second side, I remember that from Chile, China importing the cherries for $600 million per year. It is a huge amount, and of course, it would be impossible without this strategic agreement.
Chile was supposed to be the host for the APEC this time, and it canceled it because of the street demonstrations and the chaos in the country.
Yeah, of course, but this agreement is going. This trade is going. It is normal, and this you have here this goods, and China needs copper. China needs fishes. China needs also cherries, for example, from Chile, and it is the result of the strategic agreement between these two states.
So you're saying policies actually should be sustainable. It should be beyond administrations. Is that what you're trying to say?
I think that China is finding new possibilities of the development of her economy, of its economy, and this project Belt and Road is such a way which could serve to it.
Mr. Prime Minister, what a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program.
The trouble with global governance in dealing with climate change and digital regulation. In the words of a renowned professor on globalization, right after the break.
In this episode of Travelogue, Tian and I are heading to some of China's most opulent accommodations, swanky hotels that give guests a taste of the local culture in the grandest of settings.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
CGTN with the latest market-moving headlines from around the world. Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
The world is changing fast, taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too, by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know, seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Globalization has been a catchphrase for long. However, with the changes of global supply chains and global value chains, are we going to see a new version of it? Are we more likely to be rallied by common goals when global institutions are in need to be updated? Professor Martin Albro shares with me his latest soul searching.
My own particular theory about why globalization as a word took hold was because it was related to the emphasis on the global first. The global came first. We had a very famous idea called the global village. The global village, which was actually an inspiration from a Canadian scholar, anyway, Marshall McLuhan.
Marshall McLuhan. You don't know anything about Marshall McLuhan's work.
Really. I happen to teach a class at Columbia called TV, Media, and Culture. So I think that my insights into Mr. McLuhan, well, have a great deal of validity.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Well, that's funny because I happen to have Mr. McLuhan right here. So yeah, just let me come over here a second. Oh.
The global village was to suggest we all now live in a media-dominated world where messages go across the world. So that sense of global oneness came before globalization as a concept. Now, why was the word global used in turn? My argument is that it happened because in 1945, we all realized that the world now could destroy itself. We were under a global threat. That's when the word global took hold. And I'm afraid to say, old enough to remember that threat. I witnessed the Hiroshima cloud. I was 8 years old at the time. It shocked even an 8-year-old child.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
In that period, after then, we were living in a stage of global shock. We then started to think of global village. We then started to think of globalization. That's a period of history, to my mind, which has finished. The threats are still there. And indeed, one of the big problems with digitalization is we may forget the global threat. We may be so concerned with the technologies of the here and now and talking to each other, we forget the world can destroy itself. Fortunately, we have enough global activists in the world who are all fighting climate change that I'm hopeful, this is my optimism, I'm hopeful we will not lose ourselves in digitalization.
Professor, there has always been a debate, particularly recently, as to who and what forces will be the leading player. Now, many say nation states, governments lagged behind both technological advancement and people's looking for new alternatives to their way of life. Do you agree with that?
I certainly think governments lag behind the general public understanding and concern about climate change. I think climate change and preserving the environment is a much higher concern for the general public than it is for governments, by and large, I would say. I mean, when you talk with farmers, when you talk with ordinary young people in the street, they are all concerned, I would say, about climate change. This is, it's very symptomatic, that session of the United Nations where we had this young Swedish girl, Greta Thunberg, shocking the world leaders there.
How dare you?
A great media event, of course.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones.
And a lot of people dismissed it as, oh, that's just, media, manufactured by the media. But no, it was symptomatic of that real underlying concern, particularly from the younger generation. And the younger generation is the generation which supposedly is only interested in talking to each other in social media. I think that was a very fine example of the fact that no, the younger generation now is really concerned about the future. And I think our governments are lagging behind them. Some, of course, are further ahead than others. They differ greatly. But the weight of opinion behind the Paris Accord, for instance, is still not strong enough among governments. And we have this awful example of the United States actually reneging on that agreement, withdrawing from that agreement. A terrible example for the world, which will do the United States no good at all in terms of the esteem that the world holds that country.
I see. When you think about the next stage, it's kind of interesting that earlier you have a quote-unquote one-polar world, meaning the U.S., the leading power.
Yes.
Now the U.S. still has the biggest economic power, the military power,
Yes.
particularly, and also soft power.
Yes.
Miraculously, it's still something left over there on the soft power. But if you look at the future, what's likely to be the case?
As far as American soft power is concerned, I have long taken the position that American soft power is very often overstated, overestimated. So-called American soft power is actually the power of, in particular, Hollywood, and that is not particularly American. And I always remember the movie American Beauty, which is a worldwide hit.
If I had to leave tonight, would you come with me?
It raised huge objections within the United States. Why? Because it was anti-American. And in fact, Hollywood continually produces movies which don't reflect the United States so much, but reflect much more general concerns.
So you think it's a myth?
To some degree, yes. To some
Interesting.
degree, it's a myth. After all, Hollywood, go to Hollywood, people from all over the world there.
But you know, American soft power, if you ask those in the so-called public policy sector of the US, they would argue it's about welcoming everybody, it's about freedom, academic choices. You're laughing.
Well, I think on each one of those, one can point to very, very large deviations from the ideal. The American values and the American reality, the discrepancy between them is getting bigger and bigger.
Is it because of a change of a government, or is it because
No.
it's much more than that?
It's much more than that. It has to do very much with the distribution of wealth, with the reproduction of social status. The United States is no longer a country where you can move from the bottom to the top. That's a myth. Social mobility is declining in the United States all the time. If you have money, you get your child into university, and so on. When it comes to immigration, well, of course, the most recent developments in the United States suggest that their attitudes towards immigration is changing as well. No, it's not the country it was. It's not the country it was. It's going through, I think, a very, very critical stage of self-examination.
I see.
I hope, I have many very good American friends. I hope and I trust they will come through this period. I believe they will.
What about China? I mean, China, politically, system speaking, very different from many of the other developed economies.
Yes.
And emerging economies as well.
Yes.
Professor, from your perspective, how do you see that?
Well, the West itself is still not in a position to evaluate China's rise with any degree of objectivity.
Why would you say that?
Because
many would disagree with you. They're saying, oh, you're in China, so you talk in a way that the Chinese would love to hear. Is that, Professor?
Well, the Chinese may love to hear what I have to say, but that is, in a sense, it's irrelevant to me. I try to take a position which is, if you like, citizen of the world position.
Go ahead.
Which is, I look at China in terms of what it contributes to the world, what it contributes to the future, and in particular, of course, China is taking a lead in handling climate change. Very important policy progress in China on environmental protection. But above all, China challenges the West on democracy. And this is what the West cannot understand. At the moment in the West, there is a lot of soul-searching about Western democracy. There is a general feeling it's not working properly. What is not understood is that the Chinese themselves have a very deep commitment to democracy. And the West simply cannot understand, because China, surely, it's a one-party state ruled by the Communist Party.
Interesting. Professor, another question is about Europe, where you originally came from. Of course, your home country, the UK.
Yes.
So where do you think it is heading for, and what kinds of takeaways, even at the current stage, that people can draw?
The UK has a very old system of government. And like so many old things, they get worn out eventually. And in fact, the system in the United Kingdom is under great strain. We have in the past been held up as an example of democracy to the world. But when you think about it, it's a very limited form of democracy.
What do you mean?
Well, we have a parliament, and half of the parliament is one house called the House of Lords. A lot of the people in the House of Lords are there because their fathers were there. It's inherited position. We have effectively what I would say a constitutional monarchy. The Queen is the head of state. At the moment, there is a very grave risk that she will be drawn into the political process. And we have a prime minister at the moment who are not chosen by the people, but chosen by about, I think it was 140,000 members of the Conservative Party. It's a very, very antiquated form of democracy which is showing very real strain, and there is a very widespread dissatisfaction with it. So I don't think the UK at the moment can say to the world, we are the leaders of democracy. What we can say proudly, of course, is that in 12, 14, 15, we had a Magna Carta, which is for many people the development of the rule of law, and we did, after all, develop a parliament 500 years ago. But these are historic achievements. They're not achievements of the moment, I'm afraid.
Are we gonna be able to find something new?
Human beings are rather good at following particular goals. We're less good at producing institutions. I would suggest that's where we should devote our attention. Look, let's get together and solve this problem of climate change. Let's create a sustainable environment. I think the enthusiasm, the numbers, the vision is there. And I think as this young generation becomes older and my generation passes away, then they will preponderate. They will become the majority. They will actually win in the end.
Interesting to talk about the young people, because on the one hand, it seems that their lives are much more about transcending borders than the earlier generation. Yes. On the other hand, some of them have become the backbones of unilateralism. If you see some of the streets protests these days going on around the world, some of them is actually against immigration. Yeah. It's actually against a rapidly changing world. They want to maintain what they have. So how do you see this, in a way, contradiction, apparently, in your theory?
Now, I think when young people come to the streets, as for instance in Hong Kong at the moment, it's almost certainly because there are special factors affecting young people. What the social media do, of course, and what the representation of those in the conventional, old-fashioned media that we're on at this moment of time, what they do is,
even
of course,
though I would tend to disagree that is old-fashioned, but go ahead
I'm
in
so
your theory.
sorry. No, of course you're not old-fashioned here. Certainly not. I do think that the immediacy of a demonstration anywhere in the world makes obviously for compulsive viewing.
Professor, when you talk about digitization, how long do you think this is likely to be still the trend? Because we have already noticed some of the side effects of social media. Besides bringing us convenience, it also brought a lot of other side effects. So how mature do you think we could be and we can be in the immediate term about social media impact?
I do anticipate greater regulation. I anticipate that governments and, if you like, the agents of governance will want to intervene much more effectively. At the moment, we're still in almost the period of the Wild West as far as the digital media are concerned. And we've had very, very strong players, obviously, with Facebook and Zuckerberg really doing what they want. They're not going to be able to any longer. I think there is a general feeling there must be much more regulation, in particular to protect people.
Professor, two things. One is that when you talk about it's going to happen very soon, the governance, so-called, about digitization, digital media, I'm afraid it's not likely to be exactly that case. If you look at globally, there is a lack of any consensus for governments to come together. Secondly, if you look at the nature of Facebook or Twitter, it is still run by Western companies.
Yes.
And therefore, some argue whether the editorial policies will also tend to be biased at all.
At the moment, the big difference on the regulation of the media is between China on the one hand and the West on the other. The West believes that China is the outlier, China is the exception. In my belief, China is not the exception. In my belief, countries will increasingly expect to follow much more a model that China has at the moment. Now, this won't please many people in the West when I say this, but to my mind, if we are going to have a global governance system which includes the social media, then we will have to come to agreements about what the content may be and what it may not be. Now, we're a long way off from that, but that must be in the future.
But there is a fine balance, Professor, as you may know very well, about anything. On the one hand, to make sure the social media will not be the disruptor of society in a negative way, quote unquote. On the other hand, to be able to connect with the world is the real nature of the internet to begin with.
Yes.
So, Professor, how do you see this fine balance? It seems that China is also struggling with it.
Yes.
So is the rest of the world, particularly given some of the recent incidents.
Well, I think the balance is not yet clear that will be drawn, but I would certainly distinguish between the social media as it operates now, the internet in respect of communications of the traditional, which we now say traditional email kind, and then the more traditional media which comes through the mass media, through CCTV and Fox and BBC and all these traditional media.
Yeah.
Those are different layers, different levels, and I think the relations between these does need more, shall we say, careful consideration and regulation. I do think that the efforts of the mainstream media to correct fake news, for instance, is a very important development. And I do believe we need the establishment of agencies which the public can trust that they are giving us objective accounts of what is happening in the world. There is a very real danger.
You might want to remind people of the fake news, but people sometimes just refuse to listen. as they say, you cannot wake up someone who pretend to be asleep. By the nature that social media these days have all becoming echo chambers, meaning you only hear what you want to hear because you are surrounded by voices of the whose nature you want to hear to begin with.
Yes.
So, Professor, do you think that's going to be the key issue here? It's going to be the key problem here? That our lives are controlled by algorithm. The editorial policy have become algorithm choices, and people will be fed with information rather than actively looking for information that would feed them with some kind of thoughts.
Well, the echo chamber image, of course, is one where people live in a cave. They live in a cave, they shout, echoes come back to them.
Yes.
They can get out of the cave and they won't have an echo at all.
Do you think they want to get out of the cave?
Oh, yes.
Really?
Caves are dark and ugly places. And certainly, you know,
How long would
the
it take?
anthropology of human beings living in caves, they always got out in the end.
How long would it take for them to notice that the cave is a dark place?
I don't think so very long. I don't think so very long.
I love the optimism.
People always accuse me of being an optimist. In fact, I was once told by a famous German sociologist, he said, he said, the worst thing we can say to each other is to call someone an optimist.
All right, I just said the worst thing to each other. Professor Albro, what a pleasure talking to you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
All the best. And that is all the time we have for today. But Our Governance Makes a Difference series will continue. If you'd like to see more, try to find us on YouTube, also on Twitter and Facebook. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone of our team of World Insight. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.